Hey guys, new video. I said I was going to do an underrated movies video in my last video, and that's what I'm here to do. Now, I was thinking, I guess it's not the opposite of the video I just did, so it's not like movies I like that everyone seems to hate. I kind of already did a video like that. I called it Guilty Pleasure Movies, and that's kind of generally the same thing. So if you want to know some of those types of movies, you can refer back to that video. I've done like a movie on my favorite, not a movie, a video on my favorite horror movies, and then a video on some of my favorite movies. So I decided to exclude movies that were included in those kind of lists, and I got a good list of underrated movies here. Underrated, what does that mean? Mostly movies that either have mixed, actually maybe sometimes negative, mixed negative or positive reviews that I feel maybe people haven't really seen or haven't heard of. And movies also that got like really good critical reception, but I just feel like people didn't really give a chance. And other movies like that I feel like are kind of forgotten in time a bit. And there's still plenty of movies I need to see. And while I was kind of researching all these movies, I came across a bunch of movies that I was like, oh shit, I've always wanted to see that. I should really go out and see that. Like a lot of apparent underrated movies from like the 70s and 80s. So this, of course, these are just movies I've seen, but I still, of course, need to see a lot more movies. But let's start with Insomnia. Now, this is a Christopher Nolan movie. I think it came out back in like 2002, and this is back when he was doing very kind of minor films, like films with like very small budgets. And I kind of miss his films like this. I feel like his older films were a lot more focused. I like Inception and The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, but like Interstellar, I thought was pretty overrated. But I don't know. I wish he would go back to like a smaller film like Insomnia, and I think it's a movie that not everyone's gonna like. It's a very slow-paced crime thriller where Al Pacino plays a detective that comes to like a small Alaskan town where a murder has happened, and he really struggles with insomnia, and the way insomnia is portrayed and the way he acts. Like his performance in this movie is absolutely incredible. Like you actually feel like you have insomnia with him. The movie feels like it does a great job at making you feel confused, but at the same time very interested as well. It's like the film is really well shot. It takes place in Alaska, and the setting is amazing. Although I'm pretty sure it was filmed in Vancouver, but the film looks great, and Robin Williams gives a really great performance in this movie as well. A lot of interesting surprises in this movie. It's not the most creative movie ever. It's a bit of a slow burn, but I thought it was really solid, and I never hear anyone really talk about it, especially in regards to Christopher Nolan's movies. I think it's probably one of his least talked about movies, other than his first movie, which what was Following, I think. And I think Insomnia is a remake on like a Norwegian movie, I believe. I haven't seen that, the original version, but this one I thought was really good. So definitely check it out if you're into the subject matter. The next movie is 1 Hour Photo, another Robin Williams movie, and this movie is not going to be for everyone. It's very disturbing, very dark. Basically, Robin Williams plays a photo technician at like a Walmart type store, and he's really obsessed with his job. He loves his job, but outside of his job, he's a very lonely guy, very mentally disturbed guy, and he becomes obsessed with a family that comes into the store quite often. And that's all I really want to say about it. But it goes to some really dark and brutal places, and I mainly like it for Robin Williams' performance. He is absolutely amazing in this game, or a game, a game. Talking about games, no, in this movie, and it's a really haunting, powerful performance. A very, again, I don't want to spoil things, but yeah, this movie is very dark, and I think people are going to be really put off by it. But I think it is really well done. It's not going to be for everyone. I think some people are just not going to be able to handle like the subject matter. But it's well acted, it's well shot, and I think it's interesting. It's unlike like it borrows elements from other movies I've seen before, but I haven't really seen anything quite like it. I think honestly, like Robin Williams, like obviously he was an extremely funny guy, but I think he put in a lot of underrated performances. Like he was a hell of an actor, and I think this is like the number one film to prove just how good of an actor he really was. The next movie is Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, and this is a Sidney Lumet film. He's a pretty well regarded director, and this was his last film, and he died in I think 2011. This movie came out in 2007, and I never hear people talk about this movie. I really like it. It's kind of hard to describe, and I don't want to talk too much about the plot because it would spoil things. But it's one of those movies where there's multiple characters. It's mainly focused on a family, but you kind of get the viewpoints of all these different characters, and each of them have their own kind of storyline, if you will, and they kind of interconnect. There's basically a robbery at the center of all this, and it's one of those movies where it starts out very like depressing and just shit is going horribly wrong, and it just gets worse and worse, and by the end it's just everything is a complete mess. The performances across the board are amazing, and kind of an ensemble cast. Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's one of his best performances is in this movie. He plays kind of like this, this drug addict, kind of very successful. Well, again, I don't want to say too much about his character, but a very interesting character. And there's one scene in this movie, kind of like not kind of a drug deal scene, but like the drug dealer in this movie is probably one of the more interesting and memorable drug dealers I've seen in a film, even though he's not in it very much. It's just I don't know. And there was something that felt very authentic about it, and the movie in general just feels very authentic. Again, it's well shot, well acted, plenty of twists and turns that you don't expect, and the soundtrack is really good. It's actually just one song, like it's the same song over and over and over again, but it's incredibly intense and it fits like the theme of the movie so well. And I thought it really lent the film a certain atmosphere. It's one of those movies that after I stopped watching it, it really stuck in my head. And I've seen it a few times now, and I don't know, it's a very memorable movie to me, and I never hear anyone talk about it, which is a bit of a shame. The next movie is Falling Down, and not only is this underrated, this is like one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, I fucking love this movie. Joel Schumacher did this movie, and he's a director known for Batman and Robin, which is a terrible movie. And in fact, he's known for a lot of terrible movies, but this and the next movie I'm going to talk about, I actually really like. I think they're very underrated. It's weird. He's done some really good movies, but most of them are absolute shit. It's really strange. But this came out in 1993. Stars Michael Douglas as this guy that's, he starts off, he's driving in Los Angeles, and the traffic is just atrocious. And this guy, he snaps. He starts going insane and goes on a sort of violent rampage throughout the city, trying to get to his ex-wife, I believe. And I don't really want to say more than that, but it tackles a lot of interesting themes. Commercialism, the economy, race in some ways, poverty. It's a very interesting film, and it's got a very interesting message of sorts. And it's one of those movies that I feel is more relevant today than it was when it came out. I think this movie has really stood the test of time. At the same time, I think some people are going to be really turned off by it. I don't think it's going to be a movie for everyone. It's a bit hard to watch at times, and it almost is like a black comedy in some ways. All right, the next Joel Schumacher film is 8mm. Stars Nicolas Cage, came out in 1999, and this is probably one of the most disturbing, sadistic, and dark films put out by like a major Hollywood studio. Like, when I saw this movie the first time, I was honestly shocked at how dark this movie is. Basically, Nicolas Cage plays like a private investigator who's kind of called on to investigate what appears to be a snuff film. And that's all I'm going to say, but this movie goes into really dark territory, and I thought it was incredibly suspenseful, and it had a great mystery to it. Because, the core of the film is this mystery. There's fantastic performances here across the board. Again, I'm trying to be very light on spoilers for people that haven't seen it, but this movie is actually considered to be fairly terrible, which kind of surprises me. I thought this was a really excellent horror movie. And I've said in my last video, I'm not big on horror movies, but this is a good one. Because to me, like, just the concept of a snuff film, like, that's horrific. Like, that's horrific shit. Far more than fucking exorcisms and supernatural garbage. But yeah, if you're looking for like a super underrated horror movie, at least in my opinion, definitely check out 8mm. It got some like direct to DVD sequel that I don't know. I didn't even bother watching that. That movie's probably garbage, but I don't know. 8mm, it gets a lot of shit apparently, but I don't know. I really enjoyed it. Again, that said, I mean, this is really dark, brutal stuff. I think some people are just not going to be able to watch something like this. The next movie is Boiler Room. I never hear anybody talk about this movie. It came out in 2000, so quite a long time ago. But it's a Wall Street movie, but a very good one. Very entertaining, very energetic. Main character Giovanni Ribisi, I think that's how you say his name. He's kind of like a young kid who drops out of high school and kind of runs his own gambling ring out of his house, and eventually he makes it. He makes it to Wall Street, and that's kind of all I want to say. But it's I don't know. Maybe the subject matter is not going to be interesting to everybody, but they make things really exciting. There's plenty of twists and turns. The film just overall has like this really great energy to it. It's funny. The dialogue is really witty and snappy. The pacing is fantastic throughout. Very exciting. The only thing I don't like about it is the ending. I think the ending is a little too convenient and just brief. I don't know. The ending definitely wasn't too great, but overall, I think the movie's very good, and it got pretty decent reviews. But again, it's one of those movies I never hear people talk about. And as far as like Wall Street movies go, it's probably one of the better ones. Like this and The Wolf of Wall Street are probably my two favorites, and they're both very high energy kind of movies. Both very different, but both inspired by kind of like a similar. They're both inspired by like the same thing, kind of, but. Yeah, definitely a movie I'd say is that's worth checking out if you can like find it or whatever. I don't know. Again, like it's one of those movies I never hear anybody talk about this, but very underrated, I think. The next movie is The Matador, a very underrated movie starring Pierce Brosnan and Greg Kinnear. I think that's how you say his last name, but basically, the one of them's Pierce Brosnan plays like this aging hitman, and he's a very kind of goofy hitman. This movie is kind of like based. It's mostly based around like their relationship, but in typical black comedy style, there's certainly some crazy twists and turns that happen. They meet in Mexico, so it's got a really kind of neat Mexican setting, at least for most of the movie. Again, it's one of those things I don't really want to spoil. The plot goes into all sorts of different directions, but I was mainly surprised with how funny the movie is and how good Pierce Brosnan was in it. Obviously he was known for being James Bond, but I think this is probably his best performance. And I wish I wish he would do more stuff like this. The last movie I saw him in, I forget what it was called. It was like some really generic thriller type movie where he was basically playing James Bond again. But I don't know. This is a very comic performance that I think is really good. And kind of the relationship between the two characters is really interesting, I thought. But yeah, I don't know how many people have heard of this one. Came out in 2005, I think, but I remember I saw it back when it came out, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I've seen it a few times over the years, and it still holds up, I think. One of those rare black comedies to me that is actually funny. I know that's like kind of a genre that I'm not super crazy about. And I said before, I'm not crazy about comedies in general, but this is a good one. And actually, speaking of James Bond, the next movie is License to Kill. Timothy Dalton. Now, he starred in two Bond movies, this and The Living Daylights, and I actually consider them to be the most underrated films in the series. That said, I haven't seen every Bond movie. I've seen most of them, but there are a few I haven't seen. I'm trying to think. I can't really remember which ones I haven't seen at this point in time, but License to Kill, I really like this one because it's easily the darkest Bond film. I'd say even darker than like the newest ones, Skyfall, Casino Royale, which a lot of people say those are pretty dark, but I don't know. I don't think those have anything on this. Like this almost like feels like an R-rated Bond movie. It's very serious. Like there's basically no humor in it whatsoever, and I like that. I like it. I like the hard edge this movie has to it. Some really great stunts in it. I like the plot. I like the villain. Yeah, super violent, super entertaining. So yeah, and I actually think Timothy Dalton's probably one of my favorite Bonds. Honestly, I didn't think he was that bad. But out of the two he starred in, this is my favorite because it is, I think, the more violent one. Which I know some people again are probably going to disagree. The Bond movie it's all crazy arguments. Which one's your favorite? But I don't think I'd say this is my favorite in the series. I don't really know what my favorite in the series would be, but this is up there for me. I think it's really underrated. And again, it's one of those the films in the series that just people don't really talk about all that much. And I think a lot of people were put off by like the violence back when it came out, which I don't know, I find that a really strange complaint, honestly. But yeah, I don't know, I really enjoy this one, even though it does get some hate. But I don't know, definitely one of my definitely an underappreciated Bond movie for sure. The next movie is Arlington Road, kind of a forgotten movie from 1999. Jeff Bridges plays a college professor who thinks his new neighbors are terrorists, and that's all I want to say about the plot. Now, this movie gets some hate, and I can actually understand why. It's one of those movies that I know the flaws, but I can't help but enjoy it. It's pretty over the top. It's ludicrous. The plot is absolutely ludicrous, especially the ending. Although the ending did actually take me by surprise. I definitely wasn't expecting the ending to this movie. But I think it's well paced, it's well acted. I like the dialogue, and I just think it's a really entertaining, interesting kind of movie. And there's one scene in this movie, I don't want to spoil it, but it actually gave me the chills. Like, it is actually one of the creepiest small scenes I've seen in a movie ever. Really well done stuff. It's one of those movies that I really wish was better, because I think, with a better script, it could have been really amazing, but nonetheless, I still think it's a good movie to watch if you're interested in the plot. That said, you go into it. Don't try to take the movie too seriously, or you're probably not going to have a good time. But I don't know. For what it is, I think it's pretty underrated. And again, no one really talks about this movie all that much. The next movie is actually another black comedy of sorts, and that's Observe and Report. And I've mentioned before, I don't like comedies too much. This is one of the rare comedies I was actually very much surprised by. Directed by Jody Hill, and he's kind of a co-creator on Eastbound and Down, which is a very underrated, well, not really underrated, a lot of people I guess really like that show, but a really good comedy show. And this movie, I love it. It's very funny. That said, I guess some people were put off by how like offensive and mean-spirited it is. It's a very mean movie. It's very edgy and dark at times, but I don't know. The film's sense of humor, I think, really kind of gelled with me, to be honest. I thought it was really funny. I know Seth Rogen, he's kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing, but I don't know, he puts in a very different performance here. His character is very different from the usual character he plays. I don't know, I thought this was a very funny movie, especially much better than, at the same time this came out, what Paul Blart Mallorca. I can't. Well, I'm messing up the name of it, but that garbage movie came out around the same time, and this is like so much better than that. It's like almost like the complete opposite movie, really. But if you're a fan of Eastbound and Down, you might find some of the humor fairly similar with this movie. It shares some similarities for sure, but I don't know. I was very surprised by this movie. At the same time, I don't think this is going to be for everyone. I think some people might find this just not for them. Because yeah, again, comedy's kind of subjective, but I don't know. Maybe this kind of just matched my own sense of humor. I don't know. I found it funny. I thought it was surprisingly funny. That said, not consistently funny. I think there were some like dull moments, but overall, it was a nice surprise. And again, it's one of those movies that it's kind of been forgotten over the years. All right, the next movie is To Live and Die in L.A., and this is an 80s movie directed by William Friedkin, and his filmography is pretty much almost entirely underrated. Obviously, he's best known for The Exorcist, but I think he has much better movies than that, and this is one of them. It's kind of your typical crime thriller set in L.A., where you've got two Secret Service agents trying to catch a counterfeiter, and there's a I don't know. There's like plot twists in this that I really wasn't expecting. There's a car chase in the movie that's actually one of the best car chases I've ever seen in a movie. The action is just really, really entertaining. The characters are interesting. The dialogue is great. It's got a great edge to it. The soundtrack is a bit too 80s cheese for my tastes, but at the same time, the movie feels 80s in a pretty great way, I think. A lot of 80s movies kind of feel nostalgic, even though I didn't really see a lot of them back when they came out. But another movie along the same lines that he did that's really underrated, William Friedkin, is Sorcerer, which came out around the same time as Star Wars. And it made no money. It was like a box office bomb. And it was well received in later years, and I actually like it better than Star Wars. That's another movie that I'd recommend people check out. In fact, most movies he's done, One of his recent movies that he did is called Killer Joe. It's a really fucked up movie that I think a lot of people would hate, but I thought that was a very interesting movie too. Um, so yeah, To Live and Die in L.A. definitely one of the more underrated '80s movies I've seen. The next movie is Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, and this is easily his most underrated movie in my opinion. And I love all of his movies. He's one of my favorite directors. The only movie I'm kind of iffy on is Death Proof, which is kind of like I don't know. I wasn't too crazy about Death Proof. I mean, it's not bad. I don't think it's terrible like some people think it is, but definitely my least favorite of his. But Jackie Brown, you never hear anybody talk about this movie. And I really like it. It's probably one of his slower movies and probably one of his more dialogue-driven movies, but it has all the typical crazy twists you'd expect from his movies, and of course the well-written dialogue and zany, interesting characters. Robert De Niro's character in this movie is fucking amazing. And this movie is kind of like a homage to blaxploitation films. It's really well done. Like I said, it's some people probably found it maybe a bit too slow paced, but I don't know. I really enjoyed it. Again, I don't want to say too much on it, for fear of spoilers. But if you've somehow managed to avoid watching it, I definitely would recommend it. Just be prepared for a bit of a slower burn as far as his movies go. It's certainly not as action packed as some of his movies, like say like Kill Bill Volume 1, for instance. Although even that movie, most of it was fairly dialogue driven, but I mean, come on, like Quentin Tarantino, he writes some of the best dialogue in movies. So, yeah, Jackie Brown. You don't hear too many people talk about it. And I think it's easily the most underrated movie that he's done. The next movie is 1408, and this movie really surprised me. It's got a supernatural slant to it that I'm not crazy about. It's based on a short story by Stephen King. And it's rated PG-13. It's a PG-13 horror movie, and I usually absolutely hate those. So yeah, I wasn't expecting much with this one. It's got fairly decent reviews, and I think it's probably one of the least underrated of these movies. I think most people actually seem to enjoy this and or have heard of it. But what I like about this movie is the atmosphere. The atmosphere is really creepy in this movie, and I think the plot is really interesting too. Even with like some of the supernatural stuff that's going on with the story overall. But yeah, I like horror movies that rely on atmosphere and tension as opposed to like gore and blood. Sometimes gore and blood can be all right. Like I like when a movie has like a good balance between suspense, tension, and blood and guts. Like again, the John Carpenter's The Thing. Like that movie is like a master class in horror. But 1408 was a nice surprise. It's definitely among the best PG-13 horror movies, I think. I'm trying to think of some others. I don't know. I can't really think of any others. It's definitely up there. So yeah, if it seems interesting to you, definitely check it out. John Cusack gives an absolutely amazing performance in this movie. Yeah, definitely a nice surprise for me. All right, the next movie is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. A very interesting movie. It came out and it bombed critically and commercially. I think most people hated it. Its reception has gotten maybe a little better over time, but it's still not something you hear people talk about all that much, even among fans of the TV series. And I like Twin Peaks. I don't like it as much as some people do. I think it like the second season was definitely a bit of a mess, and I think it was a bit too campy and surreal for my tastes at times, especially in that second season. And this film kind of is like that in places, but overall, what I liked about this is how dark it was. This is far more disturbing than the TV show is, and this is kind of where I hope this new series, because obviously Twin Peaks is coming back on Showtime, where they're allowed basically having like really. They're allowed having any content they want. They can go pretty far with content. So I'm kind of hoping they go in a maybe not this dark. I mean, Fire Walk with Me, like this is some dark shit. Even for David Lynch, which he does some really dark movies, like Blue Velvet, for instance. But this is pretty dark, especially compared to the TV series. But I kind of hope they kind of sort of go in that direction with this new series. But who knows? Who knows if that's going to be the case? This is kind of it's a weird movie. It's kind of a prequel, but also sort of a sequel to Twin Peaks. I don't really want to talk about it too much, in terms of spoilers, but it is a movie that I would recommend watching after you've seen Twin Peaks. And if you've seen the entirety of Twin Peaks and haven't seen this movie, I definitely recommend it. I think, again, it's a love it or hate it kind of movie. I definitely think it's kind of underrated, though. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's a bit messy. But I don't know. There is something about it that just kind of gets under your skin. I think it works well as kind of like a horror movie almost. Not one of my favorite Lynch movies. Mulholland Drive is still my favorite. Like, that movie is a fucking masterpiece. Which, you know what? That's pretty much underrated too. Go watch Mulholland Drive if you haven't seen that movie. But yeah, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I was kind of surprised. I was kind of expecting to hate it when I first watched it, based on all the reception it got. But I was kind of surprised with it. I definitely enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. Okay, the last movie, Eyes Wide Shut. Now, this is a movie that I think a lot of people would hate. Stanley Kubrick, it was his last film that he ever did. I think he died like only like 6 days or so after like he presented his final cut to like the head studio. But this is a movie I've seen quite a few times, and it's I always get something new out of it. It's certainly not going to be for everyone. It's weird. It's a very strange, bizarre movie, and it has like a dreamlike quality to it that just really sticks with you. I find it's obviously known for like this really bizarre orgy scene, but it also has like a sense of mystery to it. The movie that I really found kind of interesting and engaging. Some solid performances. The atmosphere is absolutely top notch. Even though it's probably not really marketed as a horror movie or anything like that, it kind of feels like a horror movie to me at times. It's strange. It's one of those movies that's very hard to describe. It's very hard to kind of get across why I like it and appreciate it so much. And it's kind of like the case with a lot of Kubrick's movies, where I find a lot of his movies, you really have to watch them more than once. And I tend to get more out of them once I've seen them more than a couple times. Like The Shining, for instance. It's one of my favorite horror movies, but the first time I saw it, I didn't really like it all that much. It was only upon repeated viewings that I started to appreciate it more. My favorite Kubrick movie would be Full Metal Jacket. I think that's like the greatest horror movie of all time. But Eyes Wide Shut, I think, is probably one of his more underappreciated ones, and it's definitely an interesting movie to go out on as far as his career goes. I definitely recommend watching it. Although at the same time, I can't promise that you're going to enjoy it. It's certainly not going to be for everyone, but I don't know, for whatever reason, it really sticks with me. Even though it's one of those movies where when I originally heard of like what the plot was, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound interesting. That sounds like completely like not my thing at all. But I don't know, when I watched it, I was kind of surprised. Yeah, a very weird movie. Can't really. Again, it's one of those things I don't really want to spoil too much on, but certainly underrated, and one that, at least as far as Kubrick's movies goes, you don't hear too many people talking about it. All right, finally, that's it. This video has gone on way longer than I was expecting to. I came up with more movies than I thought I would. What are some of your favorite underrated movies? What did you think of some of these? Maybe you probably think some of these are garbage, which is it's always the case. You know, like with my other video, you know, of course I had tons of people disagreeing with some of the choices, agreeing with some of the choices. It's always going to happen, but I'm always interested to hear opinions, you know, on movies. That's always fun. So. Yeah, what are some underrated movies? Definitely give me some suggestions because, like I said in the beginning, there's plenty of like 70s and 80s movies in particular that are considered underrated that I haven't had the chance to seek out yet. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.